a depleted uranium shell does when it hits, it creates the heat, and then it makes millions of tiny bits of metal fly through there, and that's what kills everybody.
I went for me 18-week checkup, and they told me that my second twin baby was grossly deformed.
Nach dem Golfkrieg, Ende 1991, konnte ich im Irak dann Krankheitsbilder feststellen, die mich sehr nachdenklich gemacht haben.
My fellow Americans, major combat operations in Iraq have ended. In the Battle of Iraq, the United States and our allies have prevailed.
The war is officially over, but fighting continues and the silent tide of death keeps rising. This is the Mother and Child Hospital in Basra.
Anna Dr. Almani, Anna Schufada. What is the age?
It's 4 years old. 1 year old.
1 year old. Yes. Prognosis?
The prognosis is very bad. 80% mortality, 80%.
As we know, the DU may be transmitted by the wind and everything is contaminated now. The air, the soil, the food is contaminated by this material.
Thank you. Thank you.
This skin disease is fish-like mouth and eyes. They will die.
Sind alles schlechte Prognosen hier. Die Kinder leben alle nicht mehr lange. Furchtbare Situation. Das bedrückt mich alles so, wenn ich das sehe. Furchtbar, furchtbar, furchtbar.
Professor Sigvard Horst Günther is on his way to Iraq. The 79-year-old is escorted by Ted Wayman, Deputy Director of the Uranium Medical Research Center in Toronto, Canada. Two men looking for evidence that depleted uranium, DU ammunition, was used by the ton in the recent Iraq war. They're convinced it's responsible for Gulf War syndrome, which has now undermined the health of hundreds of thousands of soldiers and civilians. Each man has his own reasons for making this trip.
Erstens mal bin ich Arzt, zweitens war ich über 40 Jahre in diesen Regionen tätig und drittens habe ich hier Geschosse gefunden, die uranhaltig sind und habe hier schwere Krankheitsbilder gefunden. Und jetzt fahre ich hin, um zu sehen, ob sich diese Krankheitsbilder nach dem neuen Golfkrieg erneuert haben.
I've come to collect urine specimens from people who were exposed to the bombing, also to take soil samples, water samples, perhaps lung samples to look for potential contamination as a result of exposure to uranium used in coalition weapons.
On the road from Basra to Kuwait, the battlefields of both Gulf Wars, Professor Günther is looking for tanks destroyed by American and British DU shells. He uses a Geiger counter to check the level of radioactivity.
Hier haben wir nun einen Panzer gefunden, der mit depleted Uranium Munition abgeschossen worden ist, und zwar Einschläge hier am Turm und hier an der Seite. Und wenn wir das messen, dann liegt die Radioaktivität bei diesem Gerät weit im roten Bereich. Bei diesem Einschuss wird im Innern des Panzers eine Temperatur von 1000 Grad Celsius freigesetzt. Die Soldaten verglühen. Es wird Uranoxid freigesetzt und die Umwelt dadurch verseucht.
In Oweri, a suburb of Baghdad, Ted Wayman and Iraqi physician Dr. Ikram Sheikhli visit a 10-hectare site used by the Americans as a dump for captured and crippled military hardware. The purpose of the visit, to get sand and soil samples.
We need about half a gram of dust for the lab to get an adequate reading. When we were here 2 days ago, the children were scavenging and salvaging the metal to sell to the scrapyards. The dust was 3, 4, 5 inches thick, and wherever the trucks were moving, it would go up in large, like puffs, up into the air. And my counts have tripled since we walked in this direction, into this dust. My Geiger counter has gone up now to 4 times what it was when we arrived.
Uranium munitions were used for the first time by U.S. and British Allied forces in the 1991 Gulf War. Servicemen who saw them in action were very impressed.
Yeah, we saw them exploding. It's quite surreal. It's like slow motion. You know, you can sort of, you know it's hit, and then there's like a 2 or 3 second delay, and that's obviously when it's penetrating the armour, and then the whole thing just evaporates basically. It was like putting a knife through butter, really.
Uranium shells contain depleted uranium, a byproduct of nuclear power production. Nuclear waste is radioactive. It has to be stored in special containers and it needs to be guarded. And that costs money. A great deal of money when there's hundreds of thousands of tons to dispose of. So the nuclear industry was delighted when the military showed interest in its cheap uranium byproduct. The reason for that interest, uranium is one of the heaviest metals known to man, twice as heavy as lead. When a uranium shell hits a tank, it penetrates the steel armor as if it was made of paper. At the same time, part of the uranium round vaporizes and ignites inside the tank, causing the ammunition present to explode and kill the crew. This double action is what makes the weapon so appealing to military strategists.
Arms up.
Jenny Moore is a DU victim, and this is where her troubles began. During the 1991 Gulf War, she was detailed to load British tanks with uranium shells. Her eldest daughter, Rebecca, also paid a price.
I went for my 18-week checkup, and they told me that my second twin baby was grossly deformed. This professor in London actually said to me, "Do you want to tell me now? What drugs have you been taking? So we can work out how you've poisoned this baby." When you're sat there, do you know, well, it doesn't, you can't even begin to tell you what it feels like to be told that you've poisoned this baby. And that you want to be lucky that one survived. And it was only for the sake that they were in separate sacks that one survived. Come the 24th week, Emily died, and I had to carry on being pregnant with her because obviously I was carrying Rebecca at that time.
After the 1991 Gulf War, the dangers of depleted uranium were still unknown, even in Iraq. The Allies had fired off some 300 tons of DU ammunition, much of it in the fierce tank battles south of Basra. When Professor Günther received a call to Basra after the war, he knew nothing about DU munitions either.
Ich wurde im Oktober 1991 eingeladen, mir das Gesundheitswesen nach dem Embargo der UNO anzusehen. Das Gesundheitswesen war völlig zusammengebrochen. Die Kinderkrankenhäuser waren überfüllt mit Infektionen, insbesondere auch mit Kindern an Unterernährung, die dort starben. Ende 1991, in den Jahren 1992, 1993, konnte ich im Irak dann Krankheitsbilder feststellen, die ich 40 Jahre lang im Irak nicht gesehen hatte. Es war eine Häufung von Leukämie, Spaltbildung, Missbildung bei Kindern und andere Erkrankungen.
Professor Günther started taking photographs to document these new and extraordinary clinical phenomena because he'd noticed something else.
Ich hatte inzwischen Geschosse gefunden, die mir komisch vorkamen. Als ich dann außerhalb von Basra Kinder mit derartigen Geschossen spielen sah, die als Puppen angemalt waren, und eines dieser Kinder an Leukämie gestorben war, wurde ich sehr misstrauisch.
Professor Günther questioned children in Basra about where they played and what they played with. What he suspected was that all the children he had seen dying of leukemia had been playing with ammunition or in the hulks of tanks. Nearly all of the fathers of the deformed children he examined had been soldiers in the tank battle south of Basra. The deformities their offspring displayed were like those seen after the Chernobyl disaster. At the end of 1991, Professor Günther started writing articles on his findings. He believed the disorders were due to the uranium ammunition used by the Allies, which he suspected was radioactive. The first reports appeared in German newspapers. A terrible suspicion also dawned on Jenny Moore when she found, after the miscarriage that ended her second pregnancy, that her stillborn daughter had no eyes.
There again, I'd done some reading and found out that in America and certain other countries that a few babies have been born there as well with no eyes. So as soon as they mentioned it, I knew my babies died of Gulf War syndrome.
At Lake Starnberg in Upper Bavaria, two old acquaintances compare notes. Professor Günther meets Professor Asaf Durakovic, who is also a physician. He spent 12 years working for the U.S. Department of Defense, studying soldiers suffering from Gulf War syndrome. When he publicly voiced the belief that uranium ammunition was to blame, the Pentagon sacked him.
The reason for my whistleblower experience was that I simply did not agree with the government of the United States of America that the Gulf War veterans from the first Persian Gulf War should be left to die in obscurity, building, destroying weapons that have tendency.
After the 1991 Gulf War, he treated 30 soldiers suffering from disorders that were until then unknown. Disorders similar to those displayed by many children and adults in Iraq. Professor Durakovic suspected radioactive contamination, but he didn't know which substances were involved.
So we sent some of the urine samples for the neutron activation analysis, and they came back positive. And when they came back positive, everybody who was trying to discourage me from my work, they were in the state of consternation. They didn't know how to deal with it, because now I had positive results and government did not admit of any use of depleted uranium.
Professor Durakovic continued his work undaunted, establishing the Independent Uranium Medical Research Center.
About 30 patients, we found that about 67% of them had high concentrations of depleted uranium in their bodies. And there was no discussion about it, because if something is positive on mass spectrometry, it is quantized, and there is the end of the story there. There was proof about depleted uranium contamination of the Allied forces veterans in Iraq in the year 1991.
The Canadian and U.S. governments now claim that the studies Professor Durakovic had conducted on Gulf War veterans were flawed. The Canadian government ordered a new study. Another 200 Gulf War participants were examined. The result? No depleted uranium was found in the urine of a single soldier. Professor Durakovic checked the government study and found glaring errors.
So we analyzed the results, and we found that, number one, their selection of the patient was from the perfectly healthy and unexposed groups. Second, they used methodology which was meant not to detect anything. ICP-MS, it was supposed to detect nothing. And thirdly, the most important thing is they used the whole set of the wrong tissues and wrong organs. For example, they analyzed uranium in the hair. And I asked them in the correspondence, in the scientific discussion, why in the hair? Are you confusing uranium with mercury? Because mercury goes to the hair, but uranium doesn't. Uranium has absolutely no biological pathway to the human hair. They wasted close to $1 million Canadian for that totally useless study that was paid by Canadian taxpayer. It is idiotic approach to the research. Number one, there were no scientists to conduct it. Number two, interpretations were wrong. Number three, selection was wrong. Number four, methodology was wrong. So that was the end of our story in Canada.
Professor Günther adopted a different tack. In 1992, he arranged for a round of ammunition found in Iraq to be taken to Berlin in a diplomatic bag. He wanted to know if it was radioactive.
Und dann habe ich es untersuchen lassen, und zwar an 3 Universitäten. Zunächst an der Humboldt-Universität. Die sagten, das ist hochtoxisch und radioaktiv, wir wollen damit nichts zu tun haben. Gehen Sie zur Technischen Universität. Die Technische Universität verhielt sich genau. Sie sagten, wir wollen mit dem Zeug nichts zu tun haben. Gehen Sie zur Freien Universität, zum Radiologischen Institut. Und als ich dann dort ankam, sagten sie, ja, heute ist Freitag. Wir wollen das Zeug nicht, kommen Sie am Montag wieder. Ich musste dann wieder durch quer Berlin fahren, bis nach Hause und dann am Montag wieder quer durch Berlin mit dem Geschoss. Und dort waren dann schon 16 Polizisten, die mich praktisch verhaften wollten, weil sie schon informiert waren über die Radioaktivität des Geschosses. Und dann kam ein Spezialkommando der Polizei mit Schutzkleidung, mit besonderen Behältern. Und sagten, ja, das ist hochtoxisch radioaktiv, wir müssen das beschlagnahmen. Und sie sind dann mit besonderen Behältern weggefahren.
Wir haben im Jahre 1992 dieses Teil von der ermittelnden Polizei in die kleine Samtstelle gekriegt. Ziel war es, dass wir dieses sicherstellen, solange die Ermittlungen gegen den Verursacher dieses Abfalls ermittelt werden ist. Wir haben als Gutachter herausgefunden, es ist Uran, und zwar abgereichertes Uran. Uran ist ein Schwermetall, die Aufnahme in den Körper, die Wirkung im Körper ist schädlich in jedem Falle.
The result of the investigation, Professor Günther was prosecuted for the unlawful release of ionizing radiation. The court found that wrongful handling of the projectile gave rise to a risk of radioactive contamination, which could present a danger to health. Professor Günther was fined 3,000 Deutschmarks.
Das habe ich abgelehnt und daraufhin bin ich inhaftiert worden.
Professor Günther spent 5 weeks in prison for refusing to pay the fine. But all he wanted was to find out if the bullet was radioactive. Now he had the proof, and he was sure the diagnoses he'd reached in Iraq were correct.
Erstens mal ein Zusammenbruch des Immunsystems mit ansteigenden Infektionskrankheiten, insbesondere auch Virusinfektionen, dann Krebsbildungen und Leukämie, Funktionsstörungen bei Nieren und Leber, dann vor allen Dingen auch Erkrankungen genetischer Art mit Missbildungen bei Neugeborenen und dann Frühgeburten und Fehlgeburten, ähnlich wie nach dem Unfall in Tschernobyl.
The Americans and British still deny any responsibility, claiming there's no evidence that uranium ammunition is to blame for Gulf War syndrome, which has now been diagnosed in more than 150,000 war veterans. Professor Günther is convinced it is to blame, and campaigns for uranium weapons to be outlawed. At conferences like this in Hamburg, he discusses the issue with other scientists. Here, for example, it emerged that the children of American Gulf War veterans are 3 times more likely to be born with deformities than other children.
In London habe ich auch vor Abgeordneten des Unterhauses gesprochen und dabei Veteraninnen und Veteranen des Krieges kennengelernt, die sehr unter den Nebenwirkungen der Uranmunition litten. Ich weiß auch, dass viele ins Unterhaus gegangen sind, um ihre missgebildeten Kinder zu zeigen und haben dabei ihre Kriegsauszeichnung zurückgegeben.
9-year-old Kenneth Duncan is the son of one of those British Gulf War veterans. His deformities are not immediately apparent. His toes are joined together, he has cleft ears, his immune system is severely damaged. He tires quickly, needs lots of rest, and suffers from frequent severe headaches. His father, Kenny Duncan, worked behind the combat line in the 1991 Gulf War. His job? To repair damaged tanks, which included tanks hit by DU rounds in friendly fire.
We were climbing over it, inside it, working on them, you know, and we weren't wearing any respirators or anything like that. So we were breathing this dust in constantly for months on end at the end of the day. You know what I mean? So it's quite a high concentration that we were exposed to.
When Kenny Duncan got married and went to war, he was in perfect health. Now, the uranium he inhaled has made him a sick man.
The latter years, like the last probably 5 or 6 years, have been the hardest. He's getting a lot of muscle spasms at night, and he's got quite jerks and that, like he's taking a fit. So he's on medication and that for that. I think it's a constant worry as well. Is actually he's spitting up a lot of blood, and we don't know where it's coming from.
Immediately after the first Gulf War, some scientists and medical doctors tried to describe the reasons for the illnesses in the Gulf War veterans. And one of the first theories was inhalation of the desert sand, and they call it Al-Askan disease. Now, if the inhalation of desert sand was reason for Gulf War disease, everyone in a desert world would be affected by it. It is not inhalation of desert sand, it is inhalation of radioactive desert sand. And that is why I call this syndrome 3D syndrome, deadly desert dust.
Professor Günther has long and frequently pointed out the dangers of uranium dust and the pathological impact of low-level alpha radiation on pulmonary tissue and the blood.
Und ich habe immer wieder betont, dass die Nebenwirkungen doch erheblich sind der Niedrigstrahlung. Man hat es unterschätzt und habe natürlich viele Beispiele gegeben, auch von kanadischen und amerikanischen Wissenschaftlern, die der gleichen Ansicht sind, dass man die Niedrigstrahlung bisher unterschätzt hat. Und ich habe immer wieder angeregt, ein Institut zu gründen, um sich mit dieser Niedrigstrahlung zu beschäftigen.
Professor Albrecht Schott examined the genes of British Gulf War veterans. In Kenny Duncan's blood, he found a striking number of genetic mutations. Mutations typically found in persons exposed to radioactivity. Mutations which could not be due to anything else.
Kenny Duncan war ein kraftstrotzender, gesunder Mann. Seine Chromosomen sahen so aus, wie Sie es hier im Bild sehen. Dann kam die Strahlung, das kam zu Chromosomenbrüchen. Diese hohen Zahl von Chromosomenbrüchen kann man in der Familie Mandy und Kenny Duncan sehen. Sie haben 3 Kinder und alle 3 Kinder sind genetisch schwer geschädigt. Das Uran ist bei der Verbrennung zu so kleinen Partikeln verbrannt, dass es überall im Körper hingelangt. Nicht nur zu den Lymphozyten, auch zum Gehirn, zur Leber, auch zum Sperma und zu den Eizellen. Deshalb sind die Kinder von Kenny Duncan genetisch krank. Diese Kinder haben auch geschädigte Chromosomen und sie werden natürlich hohe Raten genetisch geschädigter Kinder hervorbringen. und deren Kindeskinder wieder.
You know, and if the government think for a minute that this problem is going to go away, when all of us 52,000 die, then they've got a big shock coming, because all of us 52,000 will end up having families, and these families, these kids are going to go out and get normal civilian partners. Could be like an epidemic. Do you know what I mean? We could end up infecting half the country with whatever we've got.
In February 2004, a British court upheld the claim that Kenny Duncan's health problems stemmed from exposure to uranium ammunition. He thus became the first Gulf War veteran in the world to have his illness officially recognized as being caused by depleted uranium.
But at that time you didn't know anything about the dangers?
No. The first we knew that they considered the depleted uranium shells to be a danger was when we took the tanks back from Kuwait back to the port in Saudi Arabia at Al Jubail. When we got there was people there wearing respirators and their chemical suits, and we're sort of saying, well, what have you got them on for? It's all over. And they're saying, but these shells are radioactive. That's why we've got them on. And there we've been climbing all over them for months on end and didn't know any different. But we found out later that there was an order came from the British Commander, Medical Services UK, wasn't it? Saying that depleted uranium tipped shells should be treated as a hazard.
The U.S. Army has long been aware of the hazards presented by depleted uranium ammunition. This military training video is based on a manual that was written but not distributed before the '91 Gulf War.
Heavy metal toxicity may occur if depleted uranium enters the body through open wounds, inhalation, or ingestion. Depleted uranium dust or smoke may be inhaled if respiratory protection is not worn. It may also be picked up and ingested if gloves are not worn, and the dust is not washed off before eating, drinking, or using the latrine. Or unstable munitions should be marked, secured, reported, and left for specially trained recovery retrograde teams.
So the dangers have been known for more than a decade, but the generals are reluctant to scrap uranium weapons because they give a massive military advantage. Hence, U.S. military attempts to silence critics.
Detectable radioactive signature.
And they said, you are putting your career at risk. I received telephone call from many places in the United States, and when I responded to Washington that I will not stop my work, I kept receiving telephone calls from my colleagues from the Army time from before. Some from the different parts of the saying intimately to me, Asaf, please stop doing that work, because there is nothing good for you or for anybody in it.
Professor Durakovic was later tipped off by friends that there was a serious threat to his life. Since then, he has lived in a secret location in Canada. Strange things have also happened to Professor Günther.
Ich lief hier auf der Straße, weil das hier verschmutzt war. Ich lief auf der Straße. Da sah ich dann, dass da ein Auto stand. Und wie der mich sah, fuhr er ganz schnell auf mich zu, streifte mich und ich flog hier in den Graben rein und war dadurch schwer verletzt. Ich kam dann ins Krankenhaus, war lange Zeit in Behandlung. Und nachdem ich dann entlassen war, habe ich eine Strafanzeige gestellt bei der Polizei. Die sagten, ja, können Sie sich erinnern, welche Nummer das Auto hatte? Nein. Naja, da müssen wir es gegen unbekannt machen, und später wurde das Verfahren eingestellt.
But who could have wanted Professor Günther dead?
Ich habe mir auch diese Frage gestellt. Natürlich ist man mir in der Bundesrepublik Deutschland besonders böse darüber, dass ich rausbekommen habe, dass diese Urangeschosse eine deutsche Technologie ist. Es ist in Deutschland entwickelt worden.
In January 2001, the German news magazine Der Spiegel reported that in 1972-73, the Rheinmetall Arms Company had asked a Göttingen professor to run trials involving uranium-tipped ammunition. And at Schrobenhausen in Bavaria, Spiegel research showed that the arms group MBB had spent 17 years to 1996 testing DU munitions. Siegwart Horst Günther was born in 1925 at Halle in eastern Germany.
Das sind meine Eltern, mein Vater und meine Mutter, auf die ich sehr stolz bin.
With a mother descended from a family of Polish Jews, conflict with the Nazis was pre-programmed. After leaving school, Siegwart Horst Günther volunteered for military service, but later joined the resistance against Hitler. Arrested after the attempt on Hitler's life in July 1944, he miraculously survived to tell the tale. After the war, he completed his studies and doctorate with distinction, and at the age of 31 became one of the German Democratic Republic's youngest professors. He received a call to Cairo University. In 1963, by then a professor in Damascus, he received an offer to join Albert Schweitzer at Lambaréné.
Ich war sehr glücklich in Lambaréné und Albert Schweitzer hat mir auch mein Leben geprägt durch seine Einstellung gegen die Atomwaffenversuche.
From Lambaréné, Günther moved to Baghdad and worked for nearly 40 years in the Middle East. Whenever Professor Günther comes to Baghdad now, the first place he visits is the Red Crescent. The aid organization staff are delighted to see him again and tell him about the disastrous state of healthcare in Iraq. Baghdad Gate number 6. In 2003, tanks clashed here in heavy fighting. Not far from the old city gate, Ted Wayman and Dr. Shakely planned to check the soil for traces of uranium. Only meters away, a refreshment stand.
We have a radiation count at this location, which was a site of a tank battle. The tank has been pulled out of here, of about 100 times to 150 times above normal, which is the highest level we've found so far. Where was that?
You know, at that level, it's definitely prohibited. If the area have such levels, prohibited from human being, existence.
Ted Wayman carefully collects soil samples. What they'll show when they've been analyzed in a laboratory is that this spot, right beside a refreshment stand, is very heavily contaminated. At the Mineralogical Institute of the Goethe University in Frankfurt am Main, Dr. Axel Gerdes has spent several months analyzing Ted Wayman's samples with the help of a mass spectrometer, a piece of highly sensitive equipment to which not many institutes have access.
Zum Beispiel vom Baghdad Gate. Da gab es, das waren sogenannte Hotspots, wurden die da angesprochen, wo wir halt dann Untersuchungen auch dran gemacht haben. Und da haben wir halt sozusagen reines, verarmtes oder abgereichertes Uran gefunden in diesen Bodenproben. Also die Konzentration von denen war so hoch, dass wir das sogenannte natürliche Uran da gar nicht feststellen konnten. Wenn man das jetzt auf die Staubfraktion bezieht, also da ist es ja so, dass das Uran, das abgereicherte Uran vornehmlich eben in der Staubfraktion ist. Und wenn man jetzt nur diese analysiert, dann kommt man hier auf Prozentbereiche von 50 bis 60%, die das abgereicherte Uran dort ausmacht.
What's that?
Nearly pure uranium dust. What are the implications for the people who live and work in the area?
Das heißt einfach, das Potenzial, dass Leute das einatmen, auch alle, das ist natürlich höher. Oder das ist natürlich dann noch alarmierend, dass eben nicht nur an der unmittelbaren Kriegsschaupunkt, sondern auch in Gebieten weiter weg davon das Potenzial besteht, das einzuatmen. Das ist natürlich erstmal in der Natur drin und das bleibt da auch. Das heißt, diese Gefahr, das einzuatmen, die besteht weiter für 10, für 20, für 30, für 100 Jahre.
Professor Günther on his way to Baghdad Central Hospital. As soon as he arrives, he's warned what to expect: a sharp increase in the number of non-viable fetuses, an exceptional number of babies with water on the brain, and lots of unprecedented deformities and tumors. The Iraqi doctors report that the number of malignant cancer cases has increased 8-fold since the 1991 Gulf War.
And we are giving this, and we are giving him now.
Dr. Shakely and Ted Wayman want to take readings at Baghdad's bombed-out television center. They suspect that the laser-guided precision bombs that destroyed the building contained radioactive uranium.
UMRC identified high levels of uranium in high explosive weapons that were used here. One bomb has gone through 6 layers of steel, 6 layers down through the basement, maybe 30, 40 feet into the basement, and then exploded up into the building. The question is, what can carry that, a bomb, without being destroyed all the way through that concrete, all the way into the basement of a building, this many layers?
Ted Wayman believes it was a bomb with a uranium core, so he collects soil samples here as well. He knows that for this kind of work, he should really wear a breathing mask. But he doesn't so as not to arouse the suspicions of the Americans. Even taking photographs is prohibited in places like this, so the kind of fieldwork Wayman and Shakely are doing would certainly not be allowed. Not far from the television center, the two scientists collect urine samples from local residents. Subsequent analysis show they contain as much as 400% more depleted uranium than control samples. But the researchers have also been inhaling uranium dust on this trip, and the level of contamination is measurable.
Und bei dem Ted Wayman ist auch eine deutlich höhere Konzentration nachzuweisen, wie eben der Mr. Shakely. Haben beide nur 2 Wochen dort verbracht. Da besteht natürlich Gefahr, dass für die Leute, die da leben, eben ein viel größeres Potenzial besteht, dass sie sich auch kontaminieren über die nächsten Jahre.
Anfänglich hatte ich natürlich keine Erfahrungen über die Nebenwirkung der Uranmunition und habe mir selbst schwere Gesundheitsschäden zugezogen. Inzwischen hatte ich 3 Operationen und stehe jetzt unter Medikamenten.
For his efforts to ban uranium ammunition, Professor Günther has received a host of international tributes and awards.
Hier zum Beispiel Albert-Schweitzer Preis für Medizin, dann viele französische Auszeichnungen, eine hohe polnische, die höchste polnische Auszeichnung. Und dann habe ich hier Auszeichnungen eigentlich aus aller Welt. Hier, ich bin ja auch Knight of Malta, hier habe ich österreichische Auszeichnung. Dann habe ich Auszeichnungen aller möglichen bekommen von verschiedenen Universitäten. Hier habe ich verschiedene Auszeichnungen, das ist eine besonders hohe Auszeichnung, Medicus Magnus, die ich hier gekriegt habe. Und hier sind Auszeichnungen aus Polen. Internationale Auszeichnung von Butros Ghali hier. Und ich bin Ehrenbürger des Staates Alabama und Oklahoma.
Not a single award from his own country, though.
Vom Colonel. Alles ist unterschrieben von Gouverneuren.
1995, Bosnia. Again, Americans and British use uranium missiles. And they freely admit it. But they now say they're safe. NATO combat units bombed the Hadici garrison, 12 kilometers west of Sarajevo, where the Serbs repaired their tanks. The radioactivity is still measurable today. This is where Sarajevo doctors saw the first cases of highly aggressive cancer.
Evidentno je nađeno da broj leukemija na ovom području je znatno viši nego koji se pojavljivao u predratnom vremenu kod našeg stanovništva. Određeni broj bolesti krvi i krvotvornih organa čak je za 5 do 6 puta viši nego prije ovih događanja na ovim područjima.
After the bombing of Hachichi, the Serbs suspected there might be a risk of contamination for the townsfolk. They resettled 3,500 people in Bratunac in the Serbian zone of Bosnia. But it was too late. Many were already contaminated.
Što smatramo da je sigurno agens za koga mi smatramo da je osiromašeni uranijum prouzrokovao pojavu ovih vrsta malignih obolenja. Ova maligna obolenja se javljaju kako kod odraslih, tako i kod djece. Imamo vrlo karakterističan slučaj dvije osobe, jedno je dijete od 4 godine, a druga odrasla osoba od 24 godine, koji su stali jedan pored drugoga 95. godine, neposredno su bili uz mjesto koje je bilo bombardovano i jedno i drugo za godinu i po dana posle toga obolili su od leukemije i umrli.
Over the next 5 years, nearly a third of the 3,500 people resettled from Hachichi died. Cancer claimed 1,112 lives. Novi Pazar in Serbia. The Muslim-majority city is right on the border with Kosovo. Because of the Serbian tactic of hiding tanks in residential areas, few uranium rounds hit their targets. When NATO intervened in Kosovo in 1999, it fired off 10 tons of uranium ammunition. On the night of the 24th of April, NATO planes attacked the Serbian garrison, but they also hit homes. The extremely high cancer rates seen in Bosnia are now repeated in Kosovo. The sharpest rise noted is in leukemia, and the sick in Novi Pazar are getting younger.
In that bombarding, there don't have any place that you can hide from that. I was on window one day when was bombarding. I think that bombarding or something big reason destroy my body to I get leukemia. It's not disease that was in my body a long time. I have child and I want to be his mother for all his life. That is the only fight for a reason, fight for life just because of him and then because of me and the other family. That is my last wish.
Striking numbers of leukemia cases also among the Italian, Spanish, and Portuguese soldiers serving in Kosovo. There's talk of a Balkan syndrome, a parallel to Gulf War syndrome. Officially, it's claimed there are no special health problems among the German troops in Kosovo. But this internal document shows that the Bundeswehr at Prizren has had to contend with some unusual pulmonary disorders.
Nach aller wissenschaftlichen Erkenntnis und nach aller medizinischen Erfahrung ist insbesondere bei eingesetzten Soldaten das Strahlenrisiko vernachlässigbar.
So the possession of a single uranium shell gets Professor Günther a hefty fine for releasing ionizing radiation. Yet a serving defense ministry claims that uranium ammunition used in war presents a negligible risk. Straight after the bombing, Serbian troops mark and secure areas contaminated by uranium shells.
Imajući u vidu da je osiromašeni uran, znači radioaktivni element koji ima vreme poluraspada 4,5 milijardi godina i da je maltene večan ako bi ostao na tom prostoru. Znači naš je cilj bio da to uklonimo i da time izvor opasnosti ili potencijalnu opasnost smanjimo na najmanju moguću meru i onemogućimo da taj osiromašeni uran pređe u lanac ishrane, u podzemne vode i time ugrozi stanovništvo, životinje i životnu sredinu.
Pa ja od muža mi snaha za vratom. Jedan put se razboli u Beograd, za 15 dana umri. Kosa je sva spala, za 15 dana umre mlada 59. godište. Od čega sad predviđaju da je ono što je najgore, otkud znam sa šta je. Nikad nije bila bolesna.
Both in Kosovo and in Serbia, the UN Environment Agency found traces of uranium dust in the soil, air, and groundwater. Even so, NATO still maintains there's no need for a cleanup.
Naravno, mi nismo te njihove zaključke, da kažem, prihvatili, jer je naš osnovni cilj bio da je to radioaktivna municija, da je to municija koja izaziva, može da izazove razna oboljenja kod ljudi, da traje opasnost maltene večno.
In November 2003, the Serbian army completed the rehabilitation of the first two areas. This involved digging up the uranium ammunition piece by piece and disposing of the contaminated earth at a toxic waste facility. Basra, October 2003. This city, with a population of 500,000, saw fierce fighting in both Gulf Wars. Today, it's under British occupation. The British actually said they removed contaminated tanks, but in the suburb of Abu Qasib, where a major tank battle was fought in the recent Iraq War, Ted Wayman comes across a number of tanks hit by uranium shells.
We took readings from it yesterday. Has 20,000 times radioactivity beyond background levels. This is a DU penetrator, very high radioactivity levels. Actually went into this building across the street, an ice factory. We found over here in this battlefield radioactive levels that were approaching 30,000 times background.
Those were the highest levels Ted Wayman found on this trip to Iraq. They sent the Geiger counter needle to the very end of the scale and triggered an audio alarm warning the user to leave the location at once.
This is drain water, just dirty water, and we'll see if we can find what's in this in the laboratory.
The water is dripping out of the ice factory storage tank, which was hit by a stray round of ammunition during the fighting. Ted Wayman is afraid the projectile could still be in the water.
Da in dem Gebiet von der Eisfabrik sind die Proben, die wir daher haben, sind generell hoch. Und da haben wir auch der Hauptteil des Urans, was sich da im Wasser befindet, 85%, sind auch dieses abgereicherte Uran. 6 oder 8 Mal so hohe Konzentration Uran, als es jetzt zum Beispiel von der Weltgesundheitsorganisation erlaubt, überhaupt im Wasser drin zu haben. Das Wasser ist ganz klar kontaminiert und dürfte halt nach Richtlinie her auf jeden Fall nicht mehr benutzt werden als Trinkwasser.
Dr. Axel Geddes has now analyzed the urine of soldiers returning from the recent Iraq War. Nearly half of them showed very high uranium levels.
Wir konnten bei ungefähr der Hälfte oder bei 40% der Proben konnten wir nachweisen, dass sie ein abgereichtes Uran ausscheiden. Wir konnten nachweisen, dass da eben 30–40% kontaminiert sind.
One thing worried the researcher in particular. His ultra-sensitive equipment showed that nearly all of the urine and soil samples from Iraq contained highly radioactive uranium-236.
Überall da haben wir auch das Uran-236 gefunden. Und da muss man zu sagen, das Uran-236 kommt in der Natur nicht vor. Das ist ein Isotop, was vom Mensch gemacht wurde in Atomkraftwerken. Aus diesem Uran, was aus den Wiederaufbereitungsanlagen aufkommt, gibt es natürlich dann auch Spuren von Plutonium und eventuell noch anderen Actiniden. Aber das sind alles Isotope, die alle natürlich radioaktiv sind und über den Inhalationsprozess auch viel effektiver auf den Körper, auf die Zellen einwirken könnten.
Plutonium is the most toxic substance on Earth, 1,000 times more toxic than depleted uranium. From here, the wind carries the fine invisible dust of uranium and plutonium particles to neighboring countries. Although the residues of war have been shown to include dirty uranium from reprocessing, the British and Americans are not bothering to dispose of their radioactive waste. The case that it is too dangerous is not proven, they say, but a growing number of scientists agree with Professor Günther.
Unsere Chromosomenstudie zeigt, dass Professor Günther 1991-92 zu Recht einen Zusammenhang zwischen der Anwendung von Uranmunition und schweren Krankheitsbildern vermutet hat, sondern auch, dass die Anwendung von Uranwaffen ein Kriegsverbrechen ist.
On his latest trip to Iraq, Professor Günther finds his worst fears confirmed. At the pediatric hospital in Basra, he learns from Dr. Yanin Hassan that there are 10 times more patients with cancer than before the 1991 war, and 20 times more babies with congenital deformities. The physician is in no doubt that uranium ammunition is to blame. She's afraid the tide of death will now spread to the capital, Baghdad.
Yeah. We wait what happened after 2003, and I expected increase the cases of cancer in Baghdad, mainly because most the big Baghdad is exposure to heavy bombing with in this war, and most of congenital malformation, the baby with born without head, without limb, and without nose, without eye. Before the war, most of the Iraqi women after delivery say this is a boy or girl, but after the war you say this is normal or abnormal. I have 2 or 3 mothers delivered about 3 baby with congenital malformation, and this lead to the divorce from her husbands because the husbands blame the mother here, and the father is a soldier. And we notice the increased percentage of cancer cases in children, especially leukemia, and also lymphoma, and this shifted of the age group. This is a lymphoma. This is a very bad prognosis. I thought he is die soon or later. It's very bad. He is very bad.
Es ist furchtbar, das zu sehen. Meistens nehmen die Mütter dann ihre Kinder wieder zurück nach Hause, damit sie zu Hause sterben.
This 7-year-old boy died 2 days later. Günther is on his way to Iraq. The 79-year-old is escorted by Ted Wayman, Deputy Director of the Uranium Medical Research Center in Toronto, Canada. 2 men looking for evidence that depleted uranium, DU ammunition, was used by the ton in the recent Iraq War. They're convinced it's responsible for Gulf War syndrome, which has now undermined the health of hundreds of thousands of soldiers and civilians. Each man has his own reasons for making this trip.
Erstens mal bin ich Arzt, zweitens war ich über 40 Jahre in diesen Regionen tätig und drittens habe ich hier Geschosse gefunden, die uranhaltig sind und habe hier schwere Krankheitsbilder gefunden. Und jetzt fahre ich hin, um zu sehen, ob sich diese Krankheitsbilder nach dem neuen Golfkrieg erneuert haben.
I've come to collect urine specimens from people who were exposed to the bombing, also to take soil samples, water samples, perhaps lung samples to look for potential contamination as a result of exposure to uranium used in coalition weapons.
On the road from Basra to Kuwait, the battlefields of both Gulf Wars, Professor Günther is looking for tanks destroyed by American and British DU shells. He uses a Geiger counter to check the level of radioactivity.
Hier haben wir nun einen Panzer gefunden, der mit depleted Uranium Munition abgeschossen worden ist, und zwar Einschläge hier am Turm und hier an der Seite. Und wenn wir das messen, dann liegt die Radioaktivität bei diesem Gerät weit im roten Bereich. Bei diesem Einschuss wird im Innern des Panzers eine Temperatur von 1000 Grad Celsius freigesetzt. Die Soldaten verglühen. Es wird Uranoxid freigesetzt und die Umwelt dadurch verseucht.
In Oweri, a suburb of Baghdad, Ted Wayman and Iraqi physician Dr. Ikram Sheikhli visit a 10-hectare site used by the Americans as a dump for captured and crippled military hardware. The purpose of the visit, to get sand and soil samples.
We need about half a gram of dust for the lab to get an adequate reading.
صباح الخير. أنا دكتور ألماني. أنا شوف هذا. What is the age?
It's 4 years old. 1 year old.
1 year old. Yes. Prognosis?
The prognosis is very bad. 80% mortality, 80%. As we know, the DU may be transmitted by the wind and everything is contaminated now. The air, the soil, the food is contaminated by this material.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's skin disease. It's fish-like mouth and eyes. They will die.
Sind alles schlechte Prognosen hier. Die Kinder leben alle nicht mehr lange. Furchtbare Situation. Das bedrückt mich alles so, wenn ich das sehe. Furchtbar, furchtbar, furchtbar.
Professor Sigvard Horst
what a depleted uranium shell does when it hits, it creates the heat and then it makes millions of tiny bits of metal fly through there, and that's what kills everybody.
I went for my 18-week checkup and they told me that my second twin baby was grossly deformed.
Nach dem Golfkrieg, Ende 1991, konnte ich im Irak dann Krankheitsbilder feststellen, die mich sehr nachdenklich gemacht haben.
My fellow Americans, major combat operations in Iraq have ended. In the Battle of Iraq, the United States and our allies have prevailed.
The war is officially over, but fighting continues and the silent tide of death keeps rising. This is the Mother and Child Hospital in Basra.
When we were here 2 days ago, the children were scavenging and salvaging the metal to sell to the scrapyards. The dust was 3, 4, 5 inches thick, and wherever the trucks were moving, it would go up in large, like puffs, up into the air. And my counts have tripled since we walked in this direction. Into this dust, my Geiger counter has gone up now to 4 times what it was when we arrived.
Uranium munitions were used for the first time by U.S. and British Allied forces in the 1991 Gulf War. Servicemen who saw them in action were very impressed.
Yeah, we saw them exploding. It's quite surreal. It's like slow motion. You know, you can sort of, you know it's hit, and then there's like a 2 or 3 second delay, and that's obviously when it's penetrating the armour, and then the whole thing just evaporates basically. It was like putting a knife through butter, really.
Uranium shells contain depleted uranium, a byproduct of nuclear power production. Nuclear waste is radioactive. It has to be stored in special containers and it needs to be guarded. And that costs money, a great deal of money.